Hello debunkers and welcome to Debunk Me. So 10 years ago I was sitting in my flat in Denniston trying to write this, The World Within, a science fiction novel. I was about 3/4 of the way through a bottle of red wine and I had to come up with a theory of the universe and how it actually works as told by an alien's perspective. This theory has just tickled me ever since and I'm going to share it with you now. Tectonic plate theory, the parallels with internal-external space structures of electromagnetism. So I noticed many parallels between the behaviour and relationship between mantle dynamics and plate tectonics on Earth with internal-external space structures of electromagnetism. It seemed to me as though many elements of tectonic plate behaviour, convection currents and the visible dimensions that occur as a result of the above, followed a similar pattern to the laws of particle relationships in the universe. Now bear with me. This might seem a very simplified comparison I'm about to make, but is it something worth investigating and looking into a bit further? So, example, within the Earth, irregular convection cells within the mantle transfer heat from the core to the surface of the planet. This mechanism is the driving force behind both heat transfer and the global processes of plate tectonics. The key here is the irregular convection cells. Are there any parallels in the behaviour of these irregular cells as to the behaviour of photons, for example? Now, I'm not mathematical. I have no maths experience, no astrophysics experience, no physics experience, barely even get my way around a little bit of astronomy, so bear with me. I think the point I'm trying to make here, or was trying to make after 3/4 of a bottle of red wine, are the irregular cells that somehow spread, i.e. the regular cells somehow spread heat without getting directly involved in the same way it does on planet Earth? Similarities I noticed. 1. When tectonic plates meet, there is tension. The behaviour of the plates determines the way in which things will move. What we see on the surface is a result of things going on underneath. For example, if you look at the sea sediment on ridges, people used to think that the Earth was expanding, right? It wasn't. The sediment was and still does go somewhere else. It goes underneath the seabed. It's all down to perspective and where you're standing when you observe these things, and obviously the amount of knowledge you have about, geology or whatever at the time. Earthquakes, tsunamis, mountains, we can't see the cause from surface level, but we can work out what's happening by observing the kind of movement that occurs through the way it moves. And that's, people that study the universe, they're basically working on the same concept. We can't see exactly what's happening, but we can work out what's happening from the reactions of those things, which we can observe. So what causes a specific movement if it isn't gravity? Well, a superforce does. Ultimately, the external space is only made visible from this origin. Therefore, in the plate analogy, I look at the various components. Superforce, what is it? Well, it's a power and energy which is generated from the core and mantle of planet Earth. This energy is then spread via convection currents, which make the tectonic plates move, which then creates visible dimensions to us up here on the surface. I'm clutching at straws, I know, with this example, but bear with me. To use another analogy, I'd say that the magma lava acts in the same way as a conduit between these dimensions, gravity, and that the number of dimensions, just out of funniness, reflects the same number of ways in which the internal spaces collide or move. It's just a coincidence. I think it would be interesting to investigate further the following areas. 1. If we look at the history of the Earth's geological movements, will we see any kinds of patterns in relation to the behaviour of the universe over relative comparative timescales? Here's an extract from the Burke Museum page to try and give you a little bit of an analogy of what I'm trying to get to here. The supercontinent cycle. As the continents have moved through time, they have repeatedly collided to form supercontinents. Most of the rocks that make up continents are insulators. They are reluctant to transfer thermal energy. Eventually, heat builds up beneath the continent. This activity is quite similar in space. The continental crust swells, stretches, and finally ruptures. New ocean floor begins to build within the rupture zones. Fragments of the supercontinent spread as the ocean plate grows along a new seafloor spreading centre. Because the Earth is a sphere, and this is the light bulb moment I had, the moving continental fragments inevitably reassemble about every 500 million years because they've got nowhere to go, they're on a sphere. As we will see, the creation and destruction of giant continents has played a major role in the geologic history of Washington and the Pacific Northwest. What if our universe is just like one of these continents? We're all in a sphere that inhabits, a big sphere that inhabits all the other universes, and all the space in between is, what we use to move around in. The article says that this supercontinental cycle, the assembly, rupture, breakup, spreading and reassembly, is a pattern followed by the continents. Isn't it possible that our universe is one piece of a much larger superuniverse? Now, there's probably people out there that could just debunk this in about 2 seconds. And I know, again, I sound nuts. However, hear me out. What if the Big Bang was the separation of our universe from the superuniverse, the supercontinent idea, the breakup part? From where we're standing, it looks like the universe is expanding. But again, is it? Perspective. Are we maybe just subsiding and spreading underneath another universe the same way tectonic plates do? Here's another thing. Plates can move side to side and on top of each other. So when they transform, this is where they grind past each other with no subduction. When they're convergent, that's where plates collide. And when they're divergent, that's where plates move apart. Maybe we only see, these extra dimensions because that's the ones that are on the surface, on the crust, on the fault lines, where they're visible to us. That's where they're seen. So we can't feel tectonic plates move, but we can experience an earthquake. People ask the question, what is the precise structure of internal space? Well, in this analogy, it functions like a tectonic plate does. So I'd say that the structure is not as important as asking what it does. After all, in plate movement, the interaction areas are called boundaries, and that's where stuff is happening. I think that things can appear flat, but they are not, in fact, flat. They are curved and operating in a flat-looking way. So in this analogy, I'd say that the weak forces are the equivalent of subduction and what's going on underneath, and that the structure is determined by the movement, which is influenced by the opposing forces or tension of the plates, which is influenced by magnetism, heat from the core, and energy from the core. I think that looking closer at the functionality of convection currents, we may find some similarities in behaviour of electromagnetic forces. This is a big hunch here for someone that knows nothing about science. This is probably a whole load of nonsense, but I like patterns in nature, and I think by looking closer inside our own planet, which after all is made up of bits of the same stuff as everything else in the universe, then there's no reason why we might not find clues in the processes happening, here that might shed some light into possible other processes happening at large. We've come from that stuff originally, so why would the mechanics necessarily be different? Let's be honest, I don't know enough about what is actually happening with electromagnetic forces, but from the little I do know, I thought that the behaviour seemed very similar to the mantle tectonic plate process here on Earth. So again, I might just be reading into things. That is my tectonic plate theory. I actually, this was about, 10 years ago, this popped into my head. In 2014, I sent this to Brian Cox via his website. And, nobody came to lock me up. But, don't be scared to dream. Think about crazy things, look for patterns. Like I say, what is great is it'll only take an educated person to come along and say, that was just 10 minutes of nonsense, just get back to watching, the Kardashians or whatever you're going to do tonight. But, no offense to the Kardashians, but, yeah, I don't know. I like that as a, you know, even if there's not one equation of truth to it, I quite liked it as a theory, so I stuck it in my book. And now I'm sharing it with you. So that is today's theory.